This is Lance from Lance's Auto Vlog, and I'm back with a new video. So, I got this 2023, 2021, 2020, some 2020. Anyways, Ford F350 Lariat that I'm working on. It's sick. It's a friend's truck. It's got the big wheels, lift kit, all the chrome front end on it, and, you know, front camera, rear camera. I mean, the truck's loaded. It's a Lariat. And he brought to me to look at it to see if I could fix some issues he was having with signal pop and some other stuff. Like it didn't sound good. It had signal pop. It had a lot of it had a lot of things that it just didn't sound right on a truck of this nature. And he has the Ford basic sync system, not even the upgraded system. So he tells me that he has Hertz Milli Legend speakers in here. Those are awesome. He's got Hertz rear speakers in it. And I'm like, oh man, this truck should sound decent. He's got some 6-inch subs, which I think are DD subs, but I'll look at a double check. And those should be banging because that's an imported box. So I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, this should be an easy project to just remedy and rectify. If everything's done right, it should be easy to fix as far as figuring out what's doing what. So with that said, I go, okay, no problem, dude. I'll take a look at it. We'll look at it. It shouldn't be a complicated task. And man, was I wrong. And what I mean by wrong is that the job itself could have been done a lot better. And so I took upon it as figuring out what could cause the problems he was having. So I first started off with the radio. I pulled out the radio, pulled out the tuner, and I took a look at it and I go, okay, well, how is this thing hooked up? So behind the dash, I discovered that it had a audio control LC7 behind there. I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good fail piece for people to have. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't agree with putting LC7 behind the dash, but it's not a bad piece. Now I look in there and it's just sitting behind the dash. I'm like, oh man, you can't just put something behind the dash because it'll bounce around or do whatever it's going to do. It's got to be mounted to something, taped to something, double side tape, zip tie, something. But in this case, it was just sitting back there. And then I go, okay, well, what amps does he have? And with knowing that he had amps, you know, he's a good friend of mine, so he's got to have good amps. So I'm going, okay, let's see what amps he has. And I look back there, and I discovered that he's got a Hertz amp. Okay, ML Power 4. It's a good amp, very nice amp, but it has high level input on it. So why would you need an LC7 and an amp that has high level inputs? I'm still amazed when people do that. A lot of people say, I want to run RCAs, so if I change the radio. He's never changing that radio. And if he is, it's because it's broken, not because of any other reason. So I'm like, okay, so let's pull it apart and fix the wiring and run everything the way it should be. So I ran everything from front to back high level just to see if I can solve the thumping noise. And then I find out that the amp's bad. I'm like, okay, now is that part of the install or is that part of the product failing? If I had to guess, 9 times out of 10, it's probably the install. So I'm never going to say a product's bad. So upon putting it in and double checking everything, I checked the polarity. So there's things when you install products in cars that you have to think about. And what I mean by that is you have to check your polarities, because if you go off what somebody writes in a book or something you think is right, you're probably going to find out the hard way that it's wrong. And what I mean by that is that in times like installation, you're supposed to check the polarities. You have to check the polarities, otherwise the system's not going to sound the way it should. So I checked the polarities, and of course it's wired wrong. Polarities are backwards. So I fixed that. That's an easy fix, but you need to check that. And then I also discovered that that amp has a 4-gauge input on it. So I know it has a 4 gauge on it, but they ran 8 gauge. So I'm like, okay, the amp's not going to perform the way it's probably going to perform anyway because it's not hooked up to the right amount of power. So if it's going to sound bad, it's not going to be wired right on the input side, you're going to have more problems than you want to have. And then, like there's more, he has an epicenter in there too. I'm not an enemy of audio control. I like audio control. The LC7 is a product that you need for certain reasons. And an epicenter has its need too. And so he wanted his epicenter to work. And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. The epicenter should work. If you like it, shouldn't have a problem. So he had this amp here. It's this mobile audio NIX, AVIX or whatever it's called, for his subs. And the only reason he did that is because he had another amp failure. So he put another amp in it for temporary use. So that's fine. So everything was wired in, and I kind of took it apart. So I don't have it back apart right. I don't have it put back together. I found out that the epicenter was creating a pop too. So his epicenter was bad. So he's got a bad amp and a bad epicenter. Bad. The only thing that was working fine was this amp here. So I'm like, okay. So I had kind of like a time crunch. So he put this, they had installed this amp rack in here, and they had back straps on here, mounted to here, as you can see. I got all the hardware running around here. So he had back straps holding it in place. Painted black. And I understand installers are installers. They do what they can, when they can. But you got to do it correctly. Don't just put back straps on the actual amp rack. Also, as you can see, they taped it up. They used 4 gauge on this thing, but you got wires exposed here on this amp. So I got to fix all that in a timely manner. Now, I'm not going to do my normal install because my time constraints, and this project was supposed to be a repair job, and the customer needs the vehicle back. So I'm going to clean up everything I can. The one thing I found that made it even sound bad from the standpoints of what was going on in this truck is after all that was done, for me checking that, I'm thinking at least the speakers will be wired right. You know, that's the least. Should be wired right. So I pull apart the crossovers. And do you see something wrong with that? It has tweeter inputs here, which go to the tweeters in the dash. I should say an A-pillar up here. And it's got an input, but no woofer output. This makes my job way harder from the standpoints of just trying to make this guy's car sound right. I'm not trying to make it sound grand because I'm not using the DSP, and the goal is ultimately to put a DSP in this truck. I just got to get the DSP in stock, but if you don't hook up the crossovers right, you don't run the wires right, and you don't do all the basic stuff right, there's nothing going to be right. So I got a lot of things to work on. So I'm going to try and give you what it looks like after I'm done, or at least some of the updates and do out the repair job, but I got to get it done fast. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not rebuilding an amp rack. I'm gonna clean up everything I can clean up and get him on the road until I can get him back in and do a complete job. But what I'm gonna do is I'm definitely gonna make all the wires run to where I need them to run. That way, when I go back and redo the amp rack and clean it all up, it's already done deal. So stay tuned. You got to keep moving forward. This car will sound good. So we got the wiring pulled apart and got the back amp rack pulled out, and I pulled one screw out, but this is the harness I ran, which is all loomed and all nice and ready to go. And then, so we got a ground here. I pulled one screw out here. This is one ground. That's the screw for that ground. There's the mounting bracket for the back strap. And then we got speaker wire ran, which I kind of cleaned that up a little bit, but I got to redo it again, obviously. And then we got wires here, and we got another ground over here. I don't know if you can see that. There's another ground right there, and then we got all the wires. So we got wires tapped in here, and these are the sub wires. So we're gonna clean up a lot of stuff. I'll show you the organizational process, but we got to clean up the wires and make it look like it's supposed to be in here, and then work backwards from there. So I ran tweeter wire on the left side. I got to clean that up, and then run tweeter on the passenger side, solder the wrap wire on the passenger side, fuse it, and then put everything back together, and then make it sound good. Fun. So after a couple of different versions of setups in this truck, the customer went and got a Rockford amp, and that just wasn't enough for him. My partner Mike and I, we looked at it originally and said, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, we'll go that route, but we didn't think it would be enough power, period. So we put it all together, put it in, and as you can see, it's no longer a Rockford amp, it's a sound digital amp. So this is a version 1 of this truck now, because in all honesty, we're going to redo it again. We're waiting on some parts to come in, a DSP, another amplifier, and we're going to go full active with 2 sound digital amplifiers, and we can get rid of this S935. So the only reason the S935 is in is because the sound digital amp has a high level and low level input but no output. And once we get a DSP, this is going to go bye-bye, and these are going to go bye-bye, and we can have the system all go together. So the original plan was to fix his install, get rid of a pop, but we ran into a bad amp, bad install on the crossovers because they were buried somewhere else. The panel wasn't mounted, it was just stuck in here. So we got aluminum brackets here. This is gonna probably completely redone when it's all said and done, because it may not be enough real estate, or it might be enough real estate, but it just needs to be done again, because we're gonna add obviously 2 amplifiers, a DSP, keep the epicenter, keep everything else in the system. So part 1 is done. The customer can take the car. Parts will come in the next couple of weeks, and then you'll see part 2 of the system, which will be completely different for the back end. The front end will be the same. The rear end will be totally different. So if you want to stay tuned for the second half of this video, do so. But don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.